Hi everyone, the partial prophet here. Thanks for tuning in. So I wanted to remind you that we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when the Messiah comes, we will see fully. Um, and so wanted to mention about how I've been hearing certain people say that 2020 is when we're gonna they kind of connected to uh being able to see clearly 2020 vision, and so it'd be neat if we see the Messiah come before 2020 or in early 2020. I'm hoping before. I'm hoping tomorrow, on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve. Um, um, but I get too antsy and I want the Messiah to come sooner. And so, so sometimes I miss the signs. Um, But anyways, so just it is kind of interesting that it's 2020 and you know how we talk about 2020 vision. Um, and so, we know we'll have 2020 vision when the Messiah comes and he teaches us fully. Okay, so my video today I wanted to call it O Come Emmanuel. So we know Emmanuel is the name for Jesus that means like God with us. Um, Um, and so this title comes from that song, O Come, Emmanuel. It's like one of my most favorite Christmas songs. Um, I love the words. And so I put this one verse that I really like. And so let me read it to you. O come, Emmanuel, and ransom captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. And so I highlighted and ransom captive Israel. Okay, so do you not believe that Israel is captive right now? Like in captivity. And we need we need Emmanuel, the Messiah, to come and set Israel free. And so my belief about Israel is that we have kind of the 10 missing tribes, which I think kind of make up um you know could be the Christians. um I actually do believe that it's the Christians. And then we have Judah, the Jewish people, kind of uh the being the other 2.5 tribes or 3.5 tribes or however you count it. And so what we see, like if we look at the nation of Israel, oh my gosh, they have so many problems. They can't, you know, um, they can't form a government. It's been over a year and they have not been able to, vote on a prime minister. So it's a wreck over there. And then look at what's happening over here in America. Um, we have, they're trying to impeach President Trump. It's a wreck over here too. And so definitely we see um kind of God's two nations, really just under captivity. And then, obviously mourning. God's people are mourning, because we're in exile. And so what's neat is that we can rejoice because an Emmanuel is coming to us. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about was, so I kind of wanted to redo a little bit of my last video because, obviously as we see in part and we prophesy in part, we don't totally know what God's saying in the symbolism of stuff. And so I kind of had some ideas about the supermoons that happened at the beginning of the year, and how they kind of connected to October, November, and December. Well, now I still believe that, but I think I got a little bit of the symbolism wrong. And so I wanted to, like quickly go over, like what I would change from my last video. And so I did propose in my last video that what if January supermoon connected to the month of October, February supermoon connected to November, and March supermoon connected to December? So, like 2019 started with 3 months of supermoons, with 6 months in the middle, and then it finished with 3 months. And then, so if you connect the January supermoon to October, so originally I thought it was like connected to Trump. Well, so now I'm wondering, well, I still think it's connected to Trump, but the name for it, it's called the super blood wolf moon eclipse, and I really think the wolf is Erdogan, and I'll go over a verse in another slide where that I think kind of describes Erdogan from Turkey. But we do see in October, Trump kind of doing something to make Erdogan happy, and really making a mess in the Middle East in the process. So anyway, so that was kind of my rethinking from the last video. I kind of changed my mind about who the wolf was. I was thinking Trump was the wolf, but now I'm definitely think Erdogan's the wolf. But I do think this eclipse, the blood moons, are connected to Trump. So what we saw in January was January 20th was the 2-year anniversary of Trump's inauguration. I wanted to bring up the fact that I think the beginning of this year is connected to the end of this year, because, we had the 2-year anniversary of Trump's inauguration in January, but at the end of this year in December, we've had the 2-year anniversary of 12/6/2017. And if you listened to any of my videos, you know that on 12/6/2017, that was when Trump made his announcement that he was moving the American embassy to Jerusalem. And so definitely a very important date in prophecy. So I do kind of think there's a connection that way, with the beginning of the year and the end of the year. And then what's interesting too in January is we kind of had these like, we had the lunar eclipse on January 20th, but then the next day was January 21st, which was Tu B'Shabbat, which is the New Year for trees. And so, we read in Daniel about Nebuchadnezzar's tree getting cut down due to arrogance, and then Daniel rising to prominence. So I think there's kind of this teaching. I think what God might be saying is that what we're gonna see in this year is, kind of a we're gonna see Trump's tree get cut down, and someone else rising in prominence, which I definitely think is going to be the Messiah. But I also think we're going to see Obama rise too. And then the other thing that we talked about, well, and also this year we've seen, so like New Year for trees, it's been kind of interesting this year because, like I said, Israel hasn't been able to form a government. And so what we saw was kind of like Netanyahu on his 70th birthday was not able to form a government. And so then Benny Gantz was given an opportunity to form a government. So kind of like Netanyahu out, Gantz in. But then, lo and behold, Gantz couldn't form a government. So then it was kind of, I guess, open to anyone who could do it in 21 days, and no one could do it in 21 days. And so what I'm thinking is that we're, the Messiah is going to come and is going to replace Netanyahu as the leader. And then, we see in America with Trump, so, like the American tree, he's being impeached. I definitely think he's under judgment from God for what he did, and so that he's going to be cut down. And then, like I said, I think, I think we're going to see the Messiah come, but I definitely think the Antichrist, Obama, is going to come at the same time as Messiah, and that like the Messiah is just going to be here a short time, and you know, um, and kind of disappear and give Obama a chance to work as evil, basically, is what I believe. So I think since we started that at the beginning of the year, um, that we had the two Shabbat New Year for trees, that God was maybe saying in this year we're going to see new trees. So that's what I was thinking. And then what I thought was interesting with this 21 is that we have Lamech. He dies when he's 777 years old, which connects to this 21. And so I actually kind of seen where there's a lot of teaching about like 3 weeks, or 3 groups of 7. um, and so I think there's a connection, and so I think the last 3 months of this year connect to the 3 weeks or the 3 groups of 7. And we'll talk about that later. And then what was interesting too with this lunar eclipse was it had 3 stages. So we had the earth shadow, the blood moon, and the supermoon. And I have a slide where I talk about what I believed about that. Oh, so I talked about a possible picture was, oh, here it is right here, that the earth shadow would be a picture of the moon moving into the earth shadow, would be a picture of Trump being influenced by Turkey. Definitely still believe that. And then with the blood moon, we saw the Kurds getting killed in October. And then I wrote Israel being killed, because I do think at some point what Trump did with Turkey is going to cause Israel to be killed. But we saw in October the Kurds getting killed. And then what we see, okay, so I didn't understand this when I did the last video, is that because what happens is the moon then becomes like the super moon where it's really bright. And I taught, well, that must, the third stage must be a picture of Messiah, because I couldn't picture Trump getting bright. But what happened was, and so this is why we could see a little bit more fully when things happen. What we saw with Trump was that on November 18th, his administration made an announcement about the West Bank, that America would recognize the West Bank. I don't remember exactly. They wouldn't give Israel a hard time for building in the West Bank. And so what happened is that, okay, so obviously the stuff that Trump did in October, like, really probably made people start questioning him, and just not being too thrilled with him. But then he did this thing on November 18th, and all of a sudden he was starting to look like a messiah again to people, and they were just talking about him being the greatest president for Israel and blah blah blah. And so I think this is a possible picture that God could be painting with this blood moon in January of what was going to happen at the end of the year. And then so then I talked about darkness in October. So I the darkness and kind of the blood. And then so I talked about how Trump announcing that he'd moved the troops from Syria was darkness. And then his 7th day being October 21st, he said no to Israel's request to leave some troops in Syria. But it's interesting that happened, because now, like, since then, he was kind of like, then they've been talking about let's make a pact with Israel. And, so it was kind of like, what happened in October? Like, Trump went rogue in October, and then it was, I don't know, all of a sudden he was trying to look good again or something. I don't know. It was weird. So then Oh, yeah. So this is what I think could connect to October. So these verses in Genesis 8, this is talking about Noah, I think relates to the 3 months. And then because what I think is we have like a week in each month where significant things happened. But it's all starts out with, it says, then it came about at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made, and he sent out a raven, and it flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. So I thought it was interesting that October 1st was 40 weeks after Christmas. So like the end of the 40 days. So maybe the start of the final birth pangs, started, in the month of October. And then, so what I think this could be is a picture of Trump. He opened the window of the ark, and sent out a raven. So what I believe is that the raven is the Turkey guy Erdogan, and he flew here and there until the water was dried up from the earth. And because I think there's verses that talk about Israel's enemies kind of going here and there. And then what I thought was interesting was this whole concept of window. So what I believe is that Trump is the window, and then Jesus is the door. We're taught that Jesus is the door. But one concept with the window concept is that kind of what we saw is Trump sort of gave us a window into his soul in the month of October. And so we kind of saw that maybe he's not all that great of a friend of Israel. That maybe he really has some, uh, you know, issues with Israel in his heart, because we did see for a while he didn't talk to Netanyahu after Netanyahu didn't win the election. So I just don't really think he's that great of a friend, like people want to think. And then so let me read these verses because this is where I kind of get that wolf, where Erdogan's the wolf. So it says, truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up some other way, he is a thief and a robber. But he who enters by the door is a shepherd of the sheep. So Jesus said to them again, truly, truly, I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear them. I am the door. If anyone enters through me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. He who is a hired hand and not a shepherd, who is not the owner of the sheep, sees the wolf coming and leaves the sheep and flees, and the wolf snatches them and scatters them. He flees because he is a hired hand and is not concerned about the sheep. And so, so this is a teaching about the wolf, coming after the sheep. And so I think this could be Erdogan. And so what we want to see is that, if all of a sudden Turkey comes to attack Israel, let's see what Trump does. Let's see if he's really a good friend of Israel. Because, if this is a prophecy about Trump, he's gonna, what does it say he's gonna do? Where does it say? Yeah. Oh, the highlighted part. He's gonna leave the sheep and flee. So let's wait and see what happens. Okay, and so then, let's move on to the month of February. So in there it was called the super snow moon, storm moon. So what I was teaching was that I thought the February super moon was connected to the Messiah. Like, it was kind of interesting to me that it happened on the 19th. 19 is gold, and so there's a connection to the Messiah, but there's also a connection to Israel too. But what I like started thinking, like after I looked at the events in November, is what I really think God is saying is there's a connection with the snow moon, like the storm moon, because what I really think is that judgment began in November, because it was a very stormy month for Israel. And then at, also a stormy month, like especially at the end of the month, like we actually had winter storms, um, in much of America, like around Thanksgiving time and stuff like that. Like it was crazy to travel at Thanksgiving time, and stuff like that. And so, that's what I'm thinking is that like on November 19th, we had judgment really just, uh, like, we've always kind of had judgment, like whenever you don't bless Israel, you get judgment. But I think things really kind of revved up, November 19th, because what happened was, November 18th was when Trump, made his West Bank announcement. Um, well, I mean, he had the week, I talked about this in my other video, where, he had a week where he was kind of like Jeroboam, where he, um, kind of set up two calves, like, um, and so on the 13th of November, he, um, like, I don't know, made some kind of deal with Erdogan and talked all about the tons of money that we were going, tons of business, billions of dollars of business we were going to do with Turkey. And that happened on the 13th. And then on the 18th was when he made his announcement about the West Bank, which, so remember, 18 is 666. So kind of interesting. And then, um, so then I think judgment started on the 19th, um, of November. Um, so, okay. So then what we were taught about the supermoon in February, was the biggest supermoon of the three. And so I connect that to Trump's week, like I said, where he was Jeroboam, made a deal with Erdogan on the 13th, and completed his last six, the West Bank announcement, on November 18th. So then, oh, and so I kind of rethought through what the 666 was. And so here's what I think the three sixes are: moving the embassy announcement on 12/6/2017, the Golan Heights announcement on March 21st, and then the West Bank announcement on November 18th. And then also too, I think I got the Purims wrong. I mean, in my last video, I was thinking this Purim Katan, which isn't an actual, feast, in February, um, for the Jewish people. I was thinking like, oh, what if this is a picture to the Messiah? Like it's this hidden feast. And so we're kind of going to see some kind of hidden, um, Purim, with the Messiah, in November. But but really what I figured out, obviously I could see this better after November was over, but what I saw was that, there was a connection to Trump's Jeroboam week, because, so this Purim Katan was kind of like this hidden Purim. When we're taught about Jeroboam, it's, said that he, kind of sets up a feast similar to the feast in Israel. So he kind of has this hidden Purim, this like not a real Purim. And so what's kind of interesting is that this last six that Trump did, the West Bank announcement, was, um, what we have is Trump, like everyone's thinking, oh, he's not the Messiah. I mean, they don't say he's the Messiah, but he's just, a lot of them say, like, he's the best thing that ever happened to Israel, um, and so, um, what we kind of have is Trump kind of showing up as this false Messiah, really, you know, um, you know, um, Purim is kind of the story of, I mean, one of the people, the heroes of the story is Mordecai, and so, Trump trying to look like a Mordecai type figure. And then what's interesting too in the Purim story is the Haman character. And so what I really think, and we saw this with it happened on the 13th, and and so the 13 is connected to Haman, um, um, and so that happened on the 13th. So that's what I'm thinking more than this Purim being connected to Messiah. And so and then I was thinking that, like, the way the Jewish people add the months at the beginning of the year, since it was a leap year, they added an Adar. And so, like, the first Adar was the added Adar, and so, like, you can consider that the 13th month. Um and so I was kind of doing it backwards. I was saying it was the 12th month, and, like, so November would be, like, near midnight, like near the end of the world or whatever. But it didn't happen that way. But so now I'm thinking there's really this connection to 13, that um the um the 13th of Adar is connected to November being the 13th month, where there's a connection to Erdogan. And maybe um 13 is also connected to the Antichrist. And so we saw, Trump, when he made his deal with Erdogan, was definitely being an Antichrist type figure. And then, so then let's see, what did I write here? February 19th is connected to November 19th, where 4 rockets from Syria toward, oh yeah. So there was 4 rockets from Syria that headed toward Israel, and they really think those were from Iran. Also, Netanyahu approved the West Bank bill. So, I talked about, so this is why I think, judgment really started on February 19th. We almost see this picture of, like, the war with Iran starting on February 19th. Um, um, and then, I mean, because that was the first time where we maybe saw Iran, like, directly sending rockets to Israel. And then, what I thought was interesting with Netanyahu approving the West Bank bill, it's like he's totally on the Trump train, and so just not good at all. So I already talked about lots of storms at the end of November. And then, okay, so I already talked about Trump looking like a messianic figure, causing people to get the mark. We saw Netanyahu get the mark, Okay. So let's see. Okay, so yeah, so immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Okay, so this is where, now I'm thinking that the sign of the Son of Man is where Trump looks like the Son of Man, but he isn't. It's a test to see who you would really follow. And then in Revelation 13, so we see in Revelation 13, and it says, so kind of this connection to the sign, it says, and he deceives those who dwell on the earth because of the signs which it was given him to perform in the presence of the beast, telling those who dwell, like, causing those who dwell on the earth to make an image to the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life. And it was given to him to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast would even speak and cause as many as do not worship the image of the beast to be killed. So the sign of the Son of Man, could be Trump looking like, a messianic figure in people's eyes. And then what we had was Trump was, doing some antichrist type things with Erdogan. So he was kind of making an image to the beast. I mean, almost you could say, like, the image to the beast was this deal that he made with Turkey or whatever. You know, well, like, where the beast who had the wound of the sword and has come to life, the being the Antichrist, like, So what we saw was Trump, being like the Antichrist, operating in the same type of image of the Antichrist, which is basically like we saw Obama constantly doing things that profited Israel's enemies. Well, here we see Trump doing the same thing. So, okay, so then let's see. So Daniel 9, it says, "So you are to know and discern from the issuing of decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. There will be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. It will be built again with plaza and moat, even in times of distress. Then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off and have nothing. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary, and its end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be war. Desolations are determined." So I talked about the 7 weeks connecting to Obama's 7 years. I mean, I know he was in office for 8 years, but I think he had 7 years where God really let him, have power to make a mess of the world. And then what I believe is the 62 weeks relate to where 6 in is kind of written like 60 in the Hebrew. And so that the 6 relates to the 666, and then there's 2 weeks, which I think connects to maybe the 2 times Trump made agreements with Turkey on 10/6 and 11/13. I had another thought of maybe like one was the thing with Turkey, but now I can't remember what the second thing would be. But there's 2 other things that he did that made God mad. And then so I thought it was interesting that it talks about the people of the prince who is to come. Well, who's the prince to come? That's the Antichrist. At least that's what I think. Will destroy the city. And so I thought that was a picture of Trump's, that could be God saying, so that's a picture of Trump's impeachment, or talking about Trump's impeachment. And then they're also going to come and destroy the sanctuary. And so I think that could be Israel getting attacked. So anyways, and so this happened, the blood moon, or the I don't know if it was a blood moon, but the supermoon in February happened on the 19th. I brought up about in Luke 2:19 that it was Mary pondering. What was interesting in November was we had Frozen 2 opened on November 22nd, and I wrote about how I talked about how the 11 or the 2 looks like an 11, and so actually November 22nd, it opened on November 22nd, which is 11 plus 11. So this connects to my idea of this concept of being under judgment. Winter, in the scripture could be a picture of judgment. And then what was interesting on November 22nd was that was 9 months after the Palestinians opened the Golden Gate. You could see some connections to like the Twin Towers with the Golden Gates, because there's 2 gates. So anyways, and then maybe kind of this picture of, because I'm thinking that maybe God's kind of painting this picture of warning about judgment coming to Israel. Like the Golden Gate, gold relates to the Jewish people, with the Palestinians being the enemy of the Jewish people opening the Golden Gate, could definitely be a picture of judgment coming to Israel. What was interesting is that Trump declared national emergency in February. So what if there's a connection to God declaring an emergency or judgment in November? So then I talked about judgment on Israel would happen first because, they're the leaders. And so it was interesting because on the 19th, we saw 4 rockets from Iran shot at Israel. On the 20th, Gantz couldn't form a government. On the 21st, Netanyahu was indicted. So we definitely could see judgment come into Israel. But the whole month of November, even earlier in the month, there was 10 rockets from Gaza on November 1st. On November 12th, which was actually the frost moon, and so that would be a connection to this snow moon, storm moon. There was 450 rockets, so definitely kind of interesting. And then in February there was the Lion King TV spot on February 24th, which is, I thought it was kind of, God was maybe using that to say it is time. And so what was interesting is that November 24th was the 70th year, 70th week, 70th day after Israel became a nation. We're in the 71st year, but if you counted it this way with 70 weeks, you get 70, 70, 70, and God talks about the 70th week, putting an end to sin. And so I think, maybe we're seeing kind of this picture of God moving from judgment. Maybe he started judgment on the 19th and then on the 24th. Even though I'm not sure what happened on November 24th, besides it being 70 years, 70 weeks, 70 day, but just kind of this picture of, moving to God putting an end to sin. Okay, so then moving into the March supermoon. I thought it was a connection to the Antichrist, because it's the full warm moon. I think I still think that. So we had kind of that same thing of the 20th to the 21st, and so kind of this picture of moving from the time of Trump being the 20th to the 21st being the end of the time of Trump. Or move into the 3 weeks of 7. And then Purim. So what we saw in March was, the second Purim, or actually the real Purim that they actually celebrated. And so I connected that to the second feast of Esther when Haman was exposed. And then so if we connect this Purim to the holiday of Hanukkah that happens in December, so are we going to see Haman exposed during Hanukkah? And then so I wrote, are we going to see Haman and Messiah revealed in December? Because obviously the story of Purim, we see Haman is revealed. We see Mordecai rise up as a messianic figure. And then what's kind of really interesting is the story of Hanukkah. If you connect Purim to Hanukkah, Hanukkah has their messianic figures, the Maccabees. Are definitely very strong messianic figures. And then what's very interesting is that Christmas happens on the third day of Hanukkah, so definitely fascinating. Let's see. Okay, and so also in March, they talk about with this moon being a picture of the return of the birds. And so what I thought could be interesting is, are we going to see the return of the raven that Trump let loose in October? So, that remains to be seen. We only have, almost almost just a week to see this happen. And then they talk about this full warm moon being the last full moon in winter. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Are we going to see a wrap up of things? Are we going to see a wrap up of Trump in the month of December? And it's kind of interesting because, we're already kind of seeing that with his impeachment. And so, so I wrote in here March 18th connects to December 18th with Trump's impeachment. Okay, so where did I come up with March 18th? Well, March 20th was the fast of Esther, but it's really a 3-day fast, so March 18, 1920. That's where I come up with March 18th. So I thought that was interesting that it connected to December 18th. The Jewish people only commemorate or observe the fast of Esther for one day, but really it's talked about it being a 3-day fast in the book of Esther. And then we see a connection with the spring equinox connecting to the winter solstice. So I thought that was kind of interesting because we have the 2021 thing going on too. And then in Matthew 24, we read, "But pray that your flight will not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, for then there be great tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will. Unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved, but for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short." Okay, so what I'm wondering is, because we have the summer solstice on December 21st, that would be the winter. And then what I was wondering is if, a Sabbath, like December 21st is a Sabbath. It was Saturday, I believe. And then, but I'm wondering if you could say that was winter, the day of winter. And then the Sabbath would be Hanukkah, which was December 22nd. So then the next step would be, because then he says, for then there would be a great tribulation. So then I'm wondering if the Great Tribulation might start soon after December 22nd. Let's see. The Shushan Purim was on March 22nd. I mean, nothing really kind of happened on December 22nd. Except that it was Hanukkah Eve, I think. Not totally sure. Anyways, so what we saw in March was okay, so it was kind of the Lent Easter season. I mean, Easter actually was in April, and there was no supermoon in April. So, but we could, it was the start of the Lent season, the kind of the morning preparation, before Easter, the solemn season. And, so there's not really a connection to Christmas, but we do have the Christmas season in December. I mean, both Christmas and Hanukkah are kind of joyous holidays. But I thought it was kind of interesting that, like you have kind of the Easter season in March starting, and then like Christmas, like in America celebrate Christmas in December, but Christmas is also celebrated in January. Like the Orthodox celebrate Christmas, the Orthodox Christians in January. So it kind of covers 2 months. So kind of an interesting connection. And the other thing too was, if we think of the Easter season as being, kind of the season of like the time when Jesus was on trial, it was interesting that we had in December the impeachment of Trump. So that was kind of interesting. Okay, so I said for the second Purim, it's connection to the second Feast of Esther when Haman is exposed, a connection to Hanukkah when the Greeks are dealt with. I wanted to mention, so like Purim, what we kind of see in Purim is this, one of the characters is this King Ahasuerus, who like makes a deal with Haman. And so kind of not a good figure. And then kind of the big difference between Purim and Hanukkah for the Jewish people would be like Purim would be kind of it's a story of where the Jewish people, their enemies wanted to kill them and God turned it around. So that's the picture of Purim. And then Hanukkah, the difference with Hanukkah is they didn't want to kill the Jewish people in Hanukkah. They wanted to assimilate them into the culture and kind of change them, like kind of get rid of the Jewish religion in that way. And, so that's kind of the story of Hanukkah. So anyway, so I think what I think is kind of interesting is that um with this Purim, this like quote unquote hidden Purim connected to Trump, we kind of see maybe Trump connected more to the people who are wanting, because he makes a deal with Turkey, and Turkey is part of the people that want to kill, um, Israel. And then if we connect Jesus or the Messiah to Hanukkah, that's more where, Jesus, we see this picture of Jesus coming to um, deliver God's people from this assimilation. Okay. So, like I said, I'm wondering if December is the return of the Antichrist. The second Adar is like the 12th month. So I'm doing a kind of opposite of what I thought before. And December, oh, lo and behold, December is the 12th month. And then, so maybe there's a 12-13 connection to December, January, because like I said, if the Messiah comes, not the Messiah, if the Antichrist comes, 13's connected to the Antichrist. And so I think, maybe the Antichrist would have kind of most of the month of January to do his evil. So the first Adar is maybe connected to Trump, the second Adar connected to Messiah. So the first Adar being the 13th month and the second Adar being the 12th month. Or the second Adar is like the 13th month, the 13th connected to the Antichrist. So it kind of works both ways. And then, because we saw a bunch of 13s in March, Barron Trump turned 13 on Adar 13. It was 13 months after Billy Graham died. We also saw the return of the Dragon capsule on March 8th. So some kind of definitely pictures of the Antichrist. And I was wondering if Antichrist was the worm. So we see in Jonah went out from the city and sat east of it. There he made a shelter for himself and sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. So the Lord God appointed a plan, and it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort. And Jonah was extremely happy about the plant, but God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day and attacked the plant, and it withered. So what I was wondering was, okay, so Jonah went out from the city and sat east from it. Okay, so I said before, like sometimes I think going east is not where you're supposed to go. And so like in October we see Trump going rogue. So he's leaving the city. He's not supporting Israel. He's going rogue. He's sitting in the east. And then he actually took troops out of Syria to appease Erdogan. So he went rogue. And then and then it says he made a shelter for himself and sat under it in the shade until he could see what would happen in the city. And so we saw that like Trump was kind of wanting to, what do you call it? Do kind of this, what do you call it? Fortress mentality where he just kind of wanted to take troops out, bring them back to America, and we just all sit and be nice and happy and peaceful in America, and then just let the rest of the world whatever fall apart. So we saw kind of a picture of that on October 21st in October. And then so then it says the Lord God appointed a plant, and it grew up over Jonah to be a shade over his head to deliver him from his discomfort. Okay, so if Trump is the plant, that could be a picture of Trump looking like a Messiah, like putting shade over the Jewish people's head to deliver them from their discomfort. But the thing is that this is a very temporary thing. This plan is very temporary because the worm comes and eats it, and so it's very temporary. And then, but what we see was Jonah was extremely happy about the plan. So Jonah in this verse could be Netanyahu and other people that are extremely happy about Trump, making him their Messiah, rather than the true Messiah. And then, anyway, so then it says God appointed a worm when dawn came the next day and attacked the plant and it withered. Okay, so people connected. Okay, so we already saw this in December. People connected to the Antichrist are working, impeach Trump. But then I think we could see the return of Obama, you know, and even more attacking of Trump. Okay, and so this is the verses that kind of talk about the 777, the 3 weeks. And so I won't read these verses. You could read them if you'd like. I already talked about October 1st being maybe the end of the 40 weeks, the 40 days. And then I talked about the raven being heir to God, and that happened October 6th to 7th. Okay, so I'm not totally sure, these verses, kind of the shadow, what they're teaching us. But I'm kind of guessing. And so week 1, I think that definitely happened in October. So it said that's where a dove was sent out, and the dove found no resting place for the sole of her foot. So what we saw in October was, so if the dove here is Israel or Netanyahu or something like that, we see, Netanyahu's not able to form a government. We see Trump kind of like not like doing stuff to not support Israel, and so it's kind of like Israel is not finding a resting place for the sole of their foot. And but then it talks about kind of the dove returning to him into the ark, and so that could be a picture of, then in November, Trump turns around and does, this thing to look like a Messiah. And then it says he put out his hand and took her and brought her into the ark to himself. So that could be Netanyahu on the 19th saying, hey, I like this West Bank idea. And then, so then we read about another 7 days. And so I think this is the second week or the second month, which is November. What happened then is, again, the dove was sent from the ark, and the dove came to him toward evening, and behold, in her beak was a freshly picked olive leaf. Okay, so I'm wondering if that was November 21st, would be this second week where Netanyahu was indicted. But also, let me think. But also, this was when Trump had his week. So, anyways, so not totally sure how that works. Anyways, so then, but it is kind of interesting that we see kind of this freshly picked olive leaf, like Netanyahu being indicted. And then, in the third week, waited yet another 7 days and sent out the dove, but she did not return to him again. We already see in this month the Trump impeachment, but we could see something more happen in this month. And then it says, now it came about in the 601st year, in the first month, on the first of the month, the water was dried up from the earth. So actually what we have is like maybe it's 600, and then we have a 111, so like 600 is the end of 6666, and then we have 3 months, 111 or whatever. Then it says Noah removed the covering of the ark. Okay, so covering could be a picture of the protection of Israel is removed, that God's no longer defending Israel. And then Noah looked, and behold, the surface of the ground was dried up. And then it says, in the second month, on the 27th day of the month, the earth was dry. Now that could be Christmas, because you have, October, November being the first and second months, and then 27 days, bringing us to Christmas on the Hebrew calendar, or when you count, something like that. I don't have my notes with me, so I'm not totally sure. But I know that when you count it, and I don't remember how I did the counting, but it brought me to Christmas. So um and then so we see also kind of this 3 weeks repeated with Daniel because he's mourning for 3 weeks. Gabriel talks about fighting with the Prince of Persia for 21 days. Chesvan 21 was November 19th. Um, so um oh yeah, so that could be a picture of the start of the war in Iran. Um, what's interesting is that um Daniel sees Gabriel, who's a messianic figure, on the 24th. So I'm wondering if we're going to see Messiah show up on the 24th. What's interesting about, so Daniel, when he sees this messianic figure, he falls down almost like dead, the way he describes it. Okay, we see the exact same thing with John in the book of Revelation, that when he sees this messianic figure, he falls down dead. Like he's dead. And so I'm wondering if, like, this goes back to, I wonder if when the Messiah shows up, we're also at the exact same time, we're going to see Israel get attacked, and fall down dead. So when I'm wondering about that. And so we see in Haggai where God talks a lot about the 24th. Well, not a lot, but a couple times he mentions the 24th of the 9th month. Okay, so think of ninth being the month of, delivery of the baby. And it happens in the second year of Darius. Okay, so we're past the 2-year time frame of Trump's announcement to move the embassy to Jerusalem. So did I continue this on here? Okay, so what's interesting is it says on the 24th of the 9th month in the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to Haggai the prophet, saying, do consider from this day onward, from the 24th of the 9th month, from the day when the temple of the Lord was founded. Okay, so God, kind of says some stuff to them on the 24th of the 9th month. So it's interesting because, the Hanukkah holiday starts on the 24th of Kislev. And, so, you could say that that was when the temple of the Lord was founded. That was when they rededicated the temple, back, during the time of the Maccabees, but then what we see in Haggai is the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th of the month. Okay, so what if, and then, and that's where he tells Zerubbabel that I'm going to make you like a signet ring. And so, so are we looking for a second 24? And so that would be December 24th, Christmas Eve. So definitely very fascinating. So we'll have to wait and see. I mean, it's today. I don't know when you're listening to this, but I'm anxious to see what happens tonight, before Christmas. Christmas Eve, the 24th, like, late. Okay. And then what we also see in scripture is a bunch of 3 days followed by 3 days, then a third day. So we see this in the book of Esther, where Esther says, we'll have the Jews fast for 3 days, night or day. That, me and my, I and my maidens will fast in the same way. And then Esther goes to the king on the third day. Okay. And then in Joseph, they have dreams, and it's like 3 days for the first guy and 3 days for the second guy, and then it talks about the third day being Pharaoh's birthday. Okay, so Christmas is the third day after Hanukkah. What's interesting is, this teaching about Pharaoh's birthday being on the third day, because that could be a picture of, like Christmas is, when we celebrate Jesus's birthday. So it's just interesting to me that we have Christmas being the third day of Hanukkah. And so then significant things happen in scripture on the third day. Esther goes to the king on the third day. Joseph is set free from, or not Joseph, in this story with the third day, the cupbearer and the baker are set free, but then the baker ends up getting killed. Let's see, and then okay, so what I was proposing was that, well, we could see it talks about the Jews fasting for 3 days, night or day. So I'm wondering if the Jews fasting 3 days in the day is a picture of Sukkot. So that happened in October. Because in the morning, in the daylight is when they shake their lulavs. Okay, so it's definitely like a daytime feast. And then what we could see is, okay, so then the Esther and her maidens fast in the same way. That could be a picture of Trump's week in the month of November, where he's like Jeroboam, like setting up a feast that's similar to kind of like he's setting up like a Sukkot, um you know where he's kind of painting this picture of, oh, I'm going to provide protection for Israel or whatever, but it's a fake feast because it's just not really true. And then we see, then what if we have the Jews fasting 3 days a night is Hanukkah, because what happens in Hanukkah, the Jewish people light lights in the evening. And then, like I said, the third day could be Christmas. So we'll have to see what happens. So that would give us October, November, December, with the third day happening on December 25th. And then we see kind of the same idea in John 7, where in verse 2 it talks about the Feast of Booths, so that's Sukkot. Then it talks about Jesus going up secretly to the feast, so that could be Trump's secret week. And then in verse 14-19 it talks about in the midst of the feast Jesus goes up to the temple to teach. Why do you seek to kill me? Well, Christmas, is in the middle of Hanukkah. And then in verse 37, which I think is always interesting because it's John 7:37, and we've been hearing a lot about the 737s because they're not flying. They took them out of service. And so on that day, it's the last day, the great day, where Jesus says, if anyone is thirsty. And so I kind of wonder if there's a connection to the dry bones. And what does Jesus do? He resurrects the bones. So we'll have to see what happens. And then in my last video too, I talked about Jehoiakim, king of Judah. He was like set free from prison in the 12th month on the 25th of the month. So it's kind of interesting because that looks like, back in my last video I had the 12th month being November, but I'm back to the 12th month being December. I mean, it is the 12th month. And so what if that's December 25th? And I talked to you about how another time this same story, it happened on the 27th of the month. And so actually the Hebrew date on Christmas is the 27th. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see if someone gets brought out of prison on on Christmas Day. What I thought was interesting about this Jehoiakim is his eyes were they took out his eyes, when they put him in prison. And so we kind of see we could kind of maybe see this picture of, like God's people being put in darkness, and then Jehoiakim gets set free, so no longer in prison. And then I thought it was kind of interesting in the Gospels we read about kind of what happens. Some events that happen are Jesus's trial, and then followed by Jesus's crucifixion, and then Jesus's resurrection on the third day. So we've already seen, what if Jesus's trial is a shadow of Trump's impeachment? I mean, because there's a lot of connections with Trump's impeachment to prophecy, like things kind of being fulfilled. Because, um, let's see if I can remember this. Who is it? I think it might have been Billy Graham's son, like, you know, almost kind of saying like he was without sin, throw the first stone. Kind of saying like, uh, just because Trump's a sinner doesn't mean we should get rid of him as president. So that could be a connection to that. Um, um, there was something else too, but I can't remember now. Something else that someone else said that kind of connected to prophecy. Um, so, um, anyways, and then what? So Jesus's trial is followed by his crucifixion. So I'm wondering if we're gonna see Israel attacked. Is maybe the next step on the prophetic calendar, which would be read Psalm 83 if you're wondering about that. And then, but what follows is Jesus's resurrection on the third day, and we read about resurrections happening in order. Like Jesus gets resurrected first, and then the Jewish people. This is what I think is the next one. The next resurrection we're going to see is the Jewish people in Israel, because I think Jesus is going to go over there and resurrect them just like Lazarus. And then I think maybe possibly a third resurrection would be like the Christians in America, you know, like a type of resurrection. Um, where like we see in Revelation 11 where they hear a voice saying, "Come up here," so um and then during Jesus's crucifixion, we read about darkness happening from the 6th to the 9th hour. So I'm wondering if the 6th is the time of 666, the 1260 days of the two witnesses. The 7th could be October. The 8th could be November. The 9th could be December. I remember the 9th month is the time of birth. So that would only happen if we see a birth happening. And then what's interesting about Hanukkah is that the rabbis kind of debate whether it's a holiday of decreasing light or increasing light. Well, what if Hanukkah is the decreasing light is Trump, where, I mean, obviously if Israel gets attacked during Hanukkah, there'll be definitely some people who will say, okay, I guess he's not the Messiah. But also too, if we see, like Trump, losing his position, that would be decreasing light. I don't know, it doesn't really work, but also Hanukkah is a holiday of increasing light, because really you do increase the light. You're lighting more candles each day, and so that is definitely a picture of Messiah. Okay, so I just wanted to really quick talk about Joseph with the baker and the cupbearer. I'm wondering now. See, this is what makes prophecy so hard, is because I think there's sometimes multiple fulfillments for various prophecies. And so with the baker and the cupbearer, like I said, there's multiple resurrections. And so I think there could be two fulfillments of this story, where the first one is like Jesus and Netanyahu. So, like on the third day, Jesus gets resurrected when Israel is getting cut down, and Netanyahu would be part of being, cut down. And then, but then, like a second time, a second fulfillment could be Obama, like Trump being cut down when Obama's being resurrected, kind of, sort of. And then I don't know if I'll talk about this. I think I talked about this in my last video. I think there was something I wanted to say about that. I mean, we see this concept of, we'll look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days, the two witnesses, the two martyrs, and so that would kind of relate to like the two fulfillments that I said previously, because like first we'll see Netanyahu cut down, Israel cut down, and they, you know, people from the nations look at their dead bodies for 3.5 days in Israel, and then what I think is Messiah comes, and resurrects them. And then what we could see is Trump, then because Israel got killed, it's time for judgment on Trump. And then so he gets cut down, and they look at his dead body for 3.5 days, or judgment on America, or judgment on Babylon. Um, so anyways, and like I said in my last video too, you want to be in the middle with Messiah, the dry land, no lies. You don't want to be in the sea of Trump. He's not the true Messiah. You don't want to be in the sea of Obama. He's not. Oh, he's the Antichrist. You want to be on the dry land with no lies. You want to follow the Messiah with the truth. So like I said, O come, Emmanuel, come ransom captive Israel. So obviously we need help. We need Messiah to come. We need to be set free from the judgments that are on us because of Trump being our president and doing bad things to Israel. We definitely need the Messiah. So I'm really hoping that this Christmas season, there's a lot of neat shadows with Hanukkah and Christmas that connect to the Messiah. The tree lit up for Christmas could be a picture of the Messiah. It's interesting because I really think Israel is lighting trees at, at Hanukkah time, and then the Christians light up a tree. They put lights on a Christmas tree. So the tree could definitely be a picture of Messiah. The end of the year with the new year for trees. And then, Hanukkah, the Maccabee story, fighting against the assimilation. That's definitely a picture of the Messiah. We need a Messiah because we are all definitely very assimilated. Like we're probably not even aware of how assimilated we are. Like how much this false teaching has crept into our lives. And so we definitely need the Messiah to deliver us from that. So anyways, and I'm kind of wondering too with double fulfillments if we're going to see a double fulfillment. Like we already saw Trump acting like King Ahasuerus in the book of Esther, where he like promoted Haman. So I'm wondering if we're gonna see then Messiah kind of doing a similar thing where he promotes Obama, and gives him power. But what we want to do is compare and contrast Trump with with Jesus, and everything that Trump does, is not righteous. He's doing bad things. And especially promoting Turkey was a very bad thing to do. But when like it probably doesn't sound good that Jesus is going to come and promote Obama, but everything that Jesus does is righteous. And basically it has to do with Trump just does things like out of his flesh, but Jesus is going to be led by God, by God's breath. And so that's the difference. You want to look for a Messiah that follows God, and obeys, everything that God says. And so we definitely want to compare, like if we really want to understand how Jesus is our Messiah, we want to compare his actions to Trump's actions, and I really do think like Trump was here for a time for us to kind of see why we need a Messiah, and to do things that look like the Messiah but aren't really the Messiah. In the book of John, you see kind of this comparison between Jesus and John the Baptist. And so, and kind of this teaching of John preparing the way for Jesus, and then this idea of John needing to decrease so Jesus can increase. Um, but anyway, so sometime if you ever like listen to the book of John, being read on the internet or whatever, just kind of think about that concept, and think of like Trump being the John type figure, um, preparing the way for the Messiah, but really not in the way we've traditionally thought, like, we probably thought that, I mean, we thought that John was, and I mean, he was, the real John was, actually, trying to call people to repent, but that's not how Trump's preparing us, but just, um, by his actions, um, he's preparing us. God's using him to prepare us. Let me put it that way. So, anyways, so I want to thank you so much for listening. I pray you have a blessed holiday season, a blessed Christmas, a happy Hanukkah. Um, and so who knows? So we'll have to see how prophecy plays out. I'm really looking at Christmas, Hanukkah to see what happens. Because everything just kind of fits into place, especially with that third day thing. I'm worried that you know in the gospels we read about kind of this trial of Jesus where he gets sent back and forth. I hope we don't have to wait for the impeachment to be sent to the Senate, because that could take a while. So I just don't really know. I see in part and I prophesy in part, but I'm hoping. Um, so, but thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate you listening. I pray you have a blessed holiday season. And a happy new year too. So God bless.